Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Flat Earth UK Live. Joining me tonight is an artist and author whose work on Psychopaths has reached the eyes and ears of millions. Thomas Sheridan, welcome to Flat Earth UK.
Hi, Nathan. Good to be here.
Excellent to have you here. If the world is a globe, then we've all been lied to. If the world's flat, we've all been lied to. People perpetrate this lie, and the world has not changed shape. Thomas, can you kick us off by telling us what is a psychopath?
Well, a psychopath is, to put it at this point of me looking at it, at this point of me staring at this information for all these years now, a psychopath to me is exactly what Dr. Robert Hare phrased them in his groundbreaking book Without Conscience, when he referred them as an intra, I-N-T-R-A, intraspecies predator. Essentially a parasite within the human condition. A parasite that on the consciousness level is very, very different than a normal human being. Now, the psychopath is essentially a biped parasite. It moves around on two legs, it lives amongst us, but it does not contribute to the human experience, either socially, culturally, or in any other kind of, social relationship way, in terms of meeting something 50-50 and banding together with others and achieving an objective. It's purely a self-centered, self-absorbed predator. It sees other human beings not as members of a collective human family, shall we say, but as a resource to be exploited. And that's a psychopath in the clearest, basic way.
The key word there is probably predator. Would you agree?
Predator and parasite. But the predation is often clandestine. It's very, it's not obvious. It takes sometimes a long time to unfold.
So how did you first discover that these parasites existed?
When I was about 10, there was a couple of bombs went off near where I lived in Dublin as a kid, and a lot of people were killed. And at that age, it kind of stepped me into consciousness, or it kind of like, that's why I don't think I ever woke up. I never had a waking up experience. I think I just could not get it into my head that human beings at that young an age could be so vicious and brutal towards one another. And so, therefore, looking back at it now, it was probably a desire to answer from a very early age how someone could do something so monstrous to innocent people as parked cars at a bus with bombs in them beside bus stops at rush hour.
Gotcha. I think you've frozen up for a second there. If you can still hear me, is there a particular emotion that a psychopath lacks? No, I think we've lost Thomas just for a moment. Hopefully we'll get him back very shortly. Well, with any joy, we'll get Thomas Sheridan back with us in just a few moments' time. Hopefully, we'll go through all of the various questions that I've got for Thomas. As you can probably tell from our lack of direct feed with him, I may go to some questions, see what everybody's saying in the feed. Nothing particularly exciting at this stage to keep me trundling along. I was hoping that if we had Thomas with us, we would still be talking about psychopaths' distinct lack of empathy and an inability to sort of see it from a normal human point of view or be able to relate to that person. Oh, I think Thomas has just dropped off, and hopefully will reconnect with us in just a second. And when he does, we will talk about psychopathic lack of empathy. I know from watching lots of Thomas Sheridan's work in the past that Thomas has worked in some very high institutes and financial institutes, and from his other interviews, he sort of explained how he has got in touch with a psychopath quite directly, who knew that he was a psychopath and had explained to Thomas exactly what that meant in great detail, to give him, I don't know, a background and understanding. And that's kind of where Thomas has gone. Oh, I think we've got Thomas back. Superb. Can you hear me, Thomas? I think you're just on mute at the moment. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Perfect.
I just lost connection. Okay. Actually,
my question to you, Thomas, if we can pick back up, was what is it that psychopaths lack?
They lack. Well, actually, it's a funny thing, because if you actually get one of them underneath an FRM or fMRI machine, and this is how they discovered how they're quite different as beings. It was a diagnostic system and a testing that was done, firstly developed by Robert Hare, but there was flaws in that because he mostly interviewed, shall we say, criminals. And a lot of psychopaths are not criminals. They're very clever about not getting into trouble with the law, but there are criminal ones too. But the best method for detecting them is to put them under an fMRI machine and kind of bombard them with a series of images that have a very emotionally intense on both ends of the spectrum. A normal person would show very specific, shall we say, brainwave patterns in certain partitions of the brain relating to extreme imagery. So if you show them someone getting beheaded by ISIS or whatever, certain parts will light up, showing a reaction of shock. If you show them an image of puppies and kittens, other parts in the frontal cortex will show activity, showing a feeling of empathy, nurturing, and caring. The interesting thing about a psychopath's brain is under the fMRI scanner, it's really interesting, is that it's a flat line all the way. It never shows an emotional fluctuation when exposed to stimuli of extreme emotional intensity. And that's probably the best way to detect them. It's completely reliable. But when you said, what don't they lack? Their brains do work when they need them to. That's what's so spooky about. They're almost like an alien living inside a human machine. And when they need to pretend to be compassionate and caring, they can put on the fake tears, the fake crying, and so on. But when you get to kind of be aware of it, politicians are a fantastic way to watch them, because you can see their transparency. You can see when they're fake. And so it's not a case that they lack it. It's just that they don't have any desire to use it. And that's compassion for other people.
When you mentioned Robert Hare, and is it the Psychopathology Checklist Revised? Have I got that name right?
Yeah.
I mean, how does that actually help us with people who aren't criminally insane or criminal psychopaths?
Well, you see, a psychopath is not insane. That's something that's constantly, brought up by people. There's a tremendous misunderstanding, and this is what allows them to get away with what they do. They're not like schizophrenics or people who have delusional psychosis or people who have, maybe suffering from extreme depression. They're real mental illnesses. Psychopaths are actually very well. In some ways, they're actually probably more well than we are, because the world that we live in is so completely fucked up and dysfunctional that they are actually more. They're in this world we live in, as just twisted as it is. A psychopath is probably the most cognitively healthy person within it, because that's why they succeed so well in politics and big business, for that reason. So it's so funny when you say, when you mention healthiness, they're not unwell in any way. They've tailored this world to be in their image because they've gotten to positions of power. And so it's almost like they've loaded the deck for the psychopath to get to the very top of everything, really, with except anything that's creative. They're completely useless. That's one thing. Another thing they do lack is they don't have good creativity. They're not groundbreakers in music or anything like that. They'll never
recycling.
And recycling, which is, but not even in a very. There's a very good movie I saw recently called Night Stalker.
Sure, I've just ordered it.
It's fantastic. It's that if you want to see a psychopath in action in this world today, watch that movie and study that character. The people who did that definitely did their homework. And do you remember in American Psycho? I don't know if you've seen that. where he's talking about how much he loves Huey Lewis in the News or Phil Collins. He's not talking about someone who's really a music fan. What he's doing is he's reading reviews from magazines like Spin or Mojo, or and that's it. There's no real connection to it. And if they weren't so fucking dangerous, they'd be funny at times too. There's an absurdity there to it.
I mean, is there a particular giveaway? How can we actually be certain that you're dealing with a psychopath at all?
Firstly, you can't just walk down the street and go, he's a psycho, she's a psycho. You can't even judge a person like that, because that's dangerous, because that's like going down the street and saying, oh, he's a pedophile, she's a pedophile, and that kind of thing, because you will finger innocent people. That's a scary thing, okay? Now, being with them for years, and I'm saying years, I don't mean like 50 years. I'm talking about if you're at a workplace. I'll tell you something. If you're in a workplace and a psychopath is on the make, you will figure them. You will get a hunch about this person pretty quickly. It's kind of interesting, actually, because it's almost like, because of the working world we live in, the workplace actually allows the psychopath to go out of his camouflage, or out of her camouflage, more easily. I can remember one guy I worked with, and he was very fond of going around the office and saying things like, things are really bad out there. There's no jobs. And we've all got to pull our weight here, or some of us will have to go. Some of you will have to go. Now, at the time, this company was extremely profitable. There was plenty of jobs in the end for any of us. We were all highly qualified people who get jobs outside. But this creature was just feeding on the energy of the others in the office by creating a false paradigm of fear. What politicians are doing, lots of other things. Really interesting. The workplace is a good way to do it. Now, another way is, say if you had someone who was married to your sister or your brother or something like that, and you noticed very severe changes in their personality. Suppose they were married to this person, and it was all like, I'm so in love and everything was perfect leading up to the marriage or whatever, or in the relationship in general. And suddenly, after a while, you notice a sort of a behavioral deterioration in your friend, or your family member. They're not as happy as they used to be. They've lost their sort of spark of life. They may be undergoing something called gaslighting. This is a very frightening and disturbing thing, but the psychopath that they're in a relationship with, or it could be in a job as well. Someone gets the dream job and then suddenly turns into a very unhappy and very, should we say, insecure person. They're being gaslighted by the psychopath, and they're being told that reality is wrong. And when this is a frightening thing, because they can do things like completely demolish, now slowly, over a long period of time, and sometimes quickly, which is kind of scary too, the person's sense of self. That person's sense of self is demolished. What happens is they're not even sure of themselves anymore. And that's the idea. The psychopath wants the person, especially, and I would see them almost like a fun target to do this sometimes. You'll see, I've seen this. It's never happened to me on the job. Thank God. I pulled out when it nearly did happen to me. It was being done to me, but I've seen it done to people I work with, where they were like crushed slowly within the job through comments, remarks, being told things like, on a Friday night, say on a holiday weekend. I'll tell you this one story. I'll never forget this long as I live. I was working in this one company, and it was a holiday weekend. On the Friday evening, this psychopathic guy that I was working for, well, he was the boss of the department. He puts the speakerphone on at 5 o'clock on the Friday evening when everyone was leaving to go, and he starts going, could you get on? Could I get so on this conference call, please? Yes. And then he goes, are you guys fucking serious? If you do not solve this problem right now, I will shut down this entire operation, and all of you will have no jobs on Monday morning. Now, he made it sound like there was a huge emergency. He got all these people on, terrified that they were going to like not spend the weekend with their families, right? And I was the only one in the office at that night. And when he hung up the phone, he jumped up out of his chair. He slapped his hands together, came out to me and went, have a great weekend, big guy. He had just done that to mess with their heads.
Yeah, the pure delight, just for the fun.
just for the fun, and he got his rush. They're addicted to adrenaline, and he got his emotional rush. And those people's weekends were devastated. Their lives are. But he and switching like a switch. And I was actually about 7 desks down from his office, and I was like shaking while I was typing, and I said, "Oh shit! I hope he doesn't come out and start on me."
Well, when he was on the actual phone call to them.
Yeah, the people on the phone calls he was with were all heads of other departments, but he was putting them on. And this guy used to have Machiavelli quotes on it. But he came out in a switch in personality because that persona wasn't real. That was just and quite frighteningly plausible. The anger he was projecting, but it wasn't real. It was a mind game.
That's a really good poignant example of gaslighting, but gaslighting is a term that often gets misused. Can you give us a bit more detail on what that actually means?
Yeah, nobody was talking about it before I said it. Well, big time, but now they're using it all the time, and I see it for the most silly things. I saw some comment there, and it really made me laugh. Like I tried to buy something in a shop the other. This is what this person was saying the other day, and the wrong price tag was on it. And the manager came over and explained to me that someone in the shop had put the wrong price tag on it, and it was actually a few euros more expensive. And the person writes down, "I was clearly being gaslighted." Now that was just a mistake, But what it is gaslighting is the specific annihilation of another human being's consciousness with a very specific determination to destroy and crush their personality in order to take something from them, either their dignity, their job, their money, their lives, their sexuality, you name it. It's terrifying in it's the way the psychopath will be strategically involved in this. The film, The Talented Mr. Ripley, Matt Damon plays that part perfectly.
Yeah, superb.
Superb. That's one that was my best example until this new film Night Stalker came out. But yes, that scene where he approaches the guy Dougie, who was played by Jude Law, and he drops the jazz albums on the ground. Now that's to pretend. I'm like, see, they'll learn everything about the person.
Sure,
right?
They'll learn
everything about them. Yep, and then they will demolish the person by undermining all their values, their psychic integration. Really, that's when you really want to think about it, And it is very much a spiritual thing because I don't, I can clearly state without any reservation after all these years that the people that I've met, and the ones who genuinely and the people I've interviewed who genuinely been put through the ringer, they have been spiritually damaged. Absolutely. And when I say spiritually, I mean like the spark of their soul has been burnt up and torn to pieces. And it takes them a long time.
Who are currently dealing with psychopaths or people in the aftermath or what?
Both. Oh, I don't want to go too into details, but I got a very interesting correspondence with a woman here in Ireland today. And it's been 20 odd years since she dealt with this psychopathic guy who basically she didn't go into details, but it sounds like he talked a good-looking girl into doing very degrading things. I don't know what he did for money or whatever. We will only speculate. But she said it was 22 years after she last met him. He added her on Facebook, and she said all the horror and the terror came flooding back.
In a split second,
it's horrible. It's horrible. And she said that it was almost like he was a demon buried in a part of her cognition, her cognition, waiting a demon seed that he had planted, and it gestated again when he just appeared. And that was that's when you know someone who's been gaslighted, when they have that level of post-traumatic stress, and I wouldn't even call it disorder, it's actually an injury. And years later, it comes back through either like the aftermath of a horrible relationship, abuse at workplace bullying can be one of the most horrific ones of all, and that kind of thing. And even say a friendship circle, a social circle, we'll say, right, where you could have one person in there who's demolishing another person in that social circle in order to take it over. I mean, this is why I don't join clubs, I don't join groups, because I know it's if they're successful, and they like political parties is a good one. If they're doing well and successful, I know they'll be infiltrated. I know they will. And this creature will then move in and attempt to destroy it in order to take it over for money, for whatever reason. But it will happen. And it's gaslighting is the ultimate non-physical murder of a human being. It's soul. It's an attempt to soul murder them. Yeah.
Sure, and it's not a quick process either. Like your example in the supermarket, that's such a terrible example because it's not something that takes a day. It's something that could take potentially years, if not longer.
Yeah. There was one guy that I spoke to. He contacted me. This is years ago. He wrote me after I started making the videos, and he said to me that he had to work away from home, and the town they lived in America, there was a lot of unemployment. So he took a job away from home in order to, and it was only him and his father living together. So he couldn't take care of his father because he needed to go making money in another state, whatever. While he was away, he contacted his father and he says, yeah, everything's great. There's this young guy across the street called Billy, whatever. And he's been really helpful. There was some slates missing they were hanging off the roof of the house. And he went up there and, he fixed the slates on his ladder, came down, and he says, no, I offered him money he wouldn't take. And I asked him in for a beer. And we became friends. Now, what this psychopath who was living across the street had figured out was that the father's son was away from home. He missed him. He was dependent on that relationship. And the psychopath figured out, I'll become the son.
Right.
And some of the stories, and so what started out was what seemed harmless and innocuous and healthy, as meeting the old guy, bringing over 6 packs of beer to the old guy, and they're watching sports together on TV, developed into doing things like getting up, turning the TV off, and then sitting back down. And the old guy saying, why did you turn the TV off? And he goes, I didn't turn it off, I'm watching it. What do you mean I'm watching it? It's on, the TV's on now, we're watching the football game. What? Oh, I think you're going senile, Joe. This kind of thing, And luckily another neighbor called the son, and they got back and chased this guy out. But he was already moving in on his will. He was already spending his credit cards and on TV shopping and things like that. And that took months and months and months. And what started out as like what seemed like just harmless company from the neighborhood was an attack. He'd done his homework, like you said.
I mean, that's a later, but before you get to the stage where you can, I don't know if you would just associate the same thing, but crazy making is another way that it gets phrased. But before you can get to that stage, you have to do something, which again, I don't know if you coined this phrase, but love bombing. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, I didn't come up with love bombing. Someone called Margaret Singer came up with love bombing in a book a fantastic book called Cults Among Us from the 1970s, in which she studied cults. And love bombing is an integral part of cults. So you come in the door the first time. Cults usually target people who are on the margins of society, that kind of thing. And then they'll come in, or someone is damaged in a way, and we love you, you were your friend, that kind of thing. So she coined the phrase. But yeah, love bombing is what psychopaths do. They'll seem like your knight in shining armor. The person is going to save you. They'll bullshit their way into a company, an organization, as the hotshot is going to solve this, is going to fix this place up. And in reality, they got all the jargon, all the spiel, all the glib, superficial, hey buddy, how's it going? That kind of thing. It's all bullshit. And that's love bombing, because it's been shown. I see human beings it's so interesting how a gesture of love and romance can actually release all kinds of chemicals in our brain. This is what Valentine's Day is about. It should be called the festival of dopamine, and oxytocin. And these chemicals produce this calming, relaxing, this sense of security in us, because it brings us back to the time when our mothers breastfed us or, nurtured us as children. And it's the same thing. It's the comfort, and that comfort can become a very secure thing. But what happens is when the security sets in, they'll pull it away, and then you crash. And then what you have is a situation where you're desperate to try and get that love back. I'll give you a good one. It was a research paper I'd read years ago that someone had done research on teenage psychopaths, and into what they were like as teenagers. And one of the spookiest stories I ever read was some guy was saying that when I was in junior high school, there was a kid there who was no friends. So I made friends with him, started hanging out with him, and I noticed he started looking better. He started losing his acne, his asthma started to go away, and he started to seem more confident. And I realized, this is what the psychopath was saying, that I had made him that way by being his friend. And then one day, I decided to see what would happen if I took it away. So I put him in a social circus of other people, and I said, this guy here is a loser and an asshole. And right in front of him, and they all laughed at him, or said he discovered some secret that he found out about him. And he said, and yeah, sure enough, he went down and he crouched down and he started, in the next few days, his asthma and his acne was back. And then the psychopath is going, and then I realized that if you lied to people that you were their friend or you cared about them, they would do anything you wanted.
Yeah,
well, that's spooky.
Again, I was going to come on to this probably throughout, but at that point, for the psychopath, obviously you're speaking for them, how are they feeling at that moment? So the guy's just done that to the guy. He's built him up, love bombed the guy, and then completely pulled the rug from beneath him. What does the psychopath actually feel?
Well, that's the same thing again, and it's a neutral thing. Like, interesting. The movie To Die For, with I know I keep bringing up movie references, but that's actually
excellent film.
It's useful. It's useful, yeah. And she, what's her name? Tom Cruise's ex who was in that. What's her name? Nicole Kidman, yeah. She went to see Robert Hare in Canada and asked him about what would be going on in her mind during this. So that was based on a true story.
Is that right? And so she actually consulted with Robert Hare. I did not know that.
And Robert Hare gave if you look around online, you can actually find a documentary where Robert Hare is talking about that. And Robert Hare mentions that, imagine if you were a female psychopath, you're walking down the street one day and you saw a child who'd been hit by a car. You would observe the expressions of the driver going, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Of the mother of the child screaming hysterically, my child, my child, my child. And then you would wonder why they were acting like that. Then you would go home, look in the mirror, and then start to try and make those faces. And then he goes, and that's how. But also, there's a robotic unplausibility. This is another thing. There's a roboticness about them. Again, like the Louis Lewis scene, music scene in the American Psycho, they're not the kind of person where you could feel like you'd go down to the pub and have a pint with them and have a laugh. It's robotic. It's not plausible. And when people pull out of it years later, they say to themselves, shit, I should have spotted that. It was so transparent. His or her roboticness in everything. And they do little strange things. And one of the things they don't get is humor. You'll never... This is one of the reasons I like watching comedy. I'm a huge stand-up comedy fan. I love comedy. And I often watch ones where the camera's pointing at the audience and you'll see a person sitting there like this, not laughing, when everyone's bursting out laughing. And I'm not saying it would be, but that's what that could be one, because they're looking around to see who's laughing at they don't get satire. It's the strangest thing. They do not get satire. And they will look around at people, and then they pretend to laugh with them. That's like, I think, like satire and comedy it's like art, or it's one of the most developed human traits because it takes place in the frontal cortex of the brain, which is the most human part of us. And so it's really, this is why it was so powerful in history, the bards and all this kind of thing. And they're not there. They're not in that zone. And I often think like a comedy I know it is. It's a very, very good way to take them down. Very, very good, because they don't have it. If they try to make a joke, it can be very strange and odd because they don't really get the ideas. Like, for instance, you could do satire about anything. You could say, you could, an obvious satire. When I was a woman, I used to be a nun. My name was Sister Mary Vibratus, and I used to buy Duracell back. Just something absurd like that. And 90, everyone else would be bursting out laughing at the absurdity of that. Also getting the satire of what's the word? Abstinence, sexual abstinence in the church and stuff like that, and they would show child molesting and that kind of thing, and we burst out laughing. The psychopath would go, "What? He was a nun? what? You understand? Dr. Robert Hare said they can read the sheet music, but they don't feel the music.
Sure.
And that's a very
it's so difficult to explain to somebody when you say a psychopath has a lack of empathy or a lack of anything, because then people conjure the image that they have a lack of emotion, whereas they've, like you explained, they've watched emotion, but they've not had, I don't know if it's a chemical release or what, but they haven't had the chemical release that's inclined them to run towards the child and pick it up and nurture it or dial 911 or whatever. They've just observed it so that they can almost recreate it at a later date. But the recreation isn't a real emotion. Am I correct in that sort of?
Yeah, that's bang on. It's related to the limbic regions of the brain. The limbic regions of the brain. Now, again, I'm stressing they're not unwell people. They're just not using these parts of their brains that they can't use. Everything is there. The limbic region of the brain acts almost like the gearbox of the brain, and it's almost like it makes you process a situation. Suppose like you are going to like. The limbic region of the brain would stop a normal person, me, you, anyone else, from saying, your man Nathan, he has a few grand in his house. I'm going to go over there, stab him, and take it. Right now, that's our limbic region takes the kind of like primitive animal out of us and says, well, he might have a wife and kids. It's wrong to do. It would destroy memory and lives, that kind of thing. The psychopath would be different. The psychopath wouldn't switch the limbic region on. They'd want to do it, and they'd find a way to do it, but they'd say, I'm not going to jail for this. Let me think about it. Okay, yeah. What happened to the previous guy who did that? He went to jail. I'm not doing that. The learning process. That's why when you see that film, Nightcrawler, you'll really blow your mind, because those kinds of things are played out constantly. The limbic region. There was a very interesting research thing done in Canada in 2011, where they interviewed students, and they said to them, if your girlfriend was on a bridge and the bridge was burning, what would you do? And they all said, I'd run out and grab her and try and save her. She's my girlfriend. Then they put these electromagnetic, probe things on their brain to actually switch the limbic region off. And then they asked them the same question, and they said, I wouldn't run on the bridge. I might get killed.
Yeah, all about
and that's
themselves.
The difference. All about themselves, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier about politicians. What you did a great video with a top 10 list of psychopathic jobs, but what sort of jobs do psychopaths have?
Well, not jobs that require anything creative. So you don't get them. They'll parasite. In the music business, they'd be managers, they'd be promoters. In the art business, they'd be gallery owners. They would be dealers. They would be fellas paying someone to do fraudulent copies. You know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They would, and they would. Some of them would be doing very well. Now, just look at someone. I don't want to name names, but it's like, if you look at the music business, you will see, especially today, music is terrible. Now, in terms of success, the big stuff, right? You can see there are certain individuals who completely control the music scene, right? They completely control it. They don't have any talent themselves, none at all. But there's a smugness and arrogance about them. They like to play God. You see that quite a lot. Now, any job like that would be good. Now, that top 10 list of the jobs they're drawn to was actually another research thing that was done by University College London. And it was done under this guy called Professor Dutton, who's, to be honest with you, it's the classic academia thing. There's one thing you and I have in common. We're very suspicious of academia. I am too, believe me or not. But so you take it with a grain of salt. But I think as this research was done by other people, and this charge is probably accurate, but they cluster in certain industries, and that's been scientifically shown. Mass media is one of them. I don't think that surprises anybody, right? TV, news, newspapers, and so on. I mean, that wouldn't surprise anyone. The legal profession, lawyers, judges, so on, again. Interestingly enough, not in the military. They'd be more likely to be the politicians sending the military off to absurd and rotten wars. Generally, it's been shown. Martha Stout in her book, The Sociopath Next Door, showed that like going way back to the Napoleonic era, one of the problems that they had that leaders of countries had with the military is that they couldn't understand why soldiers wouldn't kill constantly.
Yeah, shooting over people's heads and so on.
Shooting in their legs or trying to miss them. That was actually that's what a Prussian education system came about. It's another subject that really interests me. The Prussian education system, you want to talk about psychopathy in action, they decided that the best way Prussia will prosper is to turn our citizens into robots. And that's where that sort of Germanic stereotype came from, of the, I'm just following orders kind of thing. And that's been adopted by every educational system in the world ever since. Yeah, exactly. That's it. And that would be one. There was other ones that media, lawyers, the legal profession. Now, politicians wasn't on the list, funny enough, because academics know who pays their bills. They're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. But they did a lot of, if you look at a lot of politicians, they're nearly always lawyers. They're nearly always involved. They come from the legal profession. So that was covered there. And then there was the other end of the scale. There was things like nursing and people involved in taking care of the handicapped and disabled. They were actually, there was almost zero psychopathy there because they're really thankless jobs in many ways. They don't pay enough, so a psychopath wouldn't be interested.
I mean, there's an assertion that's made quite frequently that Tony Blair is a psychopath. Would you agree with that assertion?
Oh yeah, I've no problem saying that. He can sue me. Let's go. Let's put his head under the fMRI machine. Tony Blair, and I said it at an event in London, a very big event, and ever since then my life became very difficult for some strange reason. But yes, Tony Blair, if he's, what's that?
I said, is that so?
Oh yeah, I'm on the watch lists and everything. When I go to fly, I'm on the section where they have where you come down as people to be watched and stuff. I'm flying in and out of the UK, and it happened right after that. But anyway, Tony Blair, if he is not one, then I will refund all the money that I've ever made from my book sales. Tony Blair demonstrates frightening levels of that kind of behavior, especially is after what he did let's look at how he got elected. Do you remember that whole new Labour thing, right? Walking around with a guitar case in his hand out to appeal to the
youth. Did they call him Bambi right at the beginning?
I don't remember, but it was all kinds of bullshit like that going on. It was all very contrived and fake and transparent. But he knew that British people were hoping for a savior after Thatcher. So he lied about every policy. He said he'd bring back British Rail, all kinds of things. But the best one of all was when he got involved with Bush and the weapons of mass destruction. And he openly lied and forced a nation into a war that led to 1.5 million deaths over a lie that he knew was a lie. And then after this ends, and after he's basically thrown out of office when even his own people didn't want him, he forms this Tony Blair Interfaith Foundation, where he brings people of different religions together, and he talks about how his faith is so important to him and all this nonsense. And this is a guy who's like, if we lived in any other time, he would be in the Nuremberg trials for what he did. And yet he walks around as the great peacemaker and the saint. He has gaslighted the world, actually. He's gaslighted the world to make, lots of us can see him for the piece of shit that he is, but he's gaslighted the world to have people believe, millions and millions of people believe that he is a fucking peacemaker on the bodies of millions. And that to me is frightening.
Sort of like it's the perfect new mask, walk away from the old life. The new Tony Blair's a different person now.
That's exactly it, because that's one of the identifying factors as well. The personalities are not real. Now, we all go through stages in our lives that are usually caused by changes in lives, like a relationship might end, or we might go on a new career path, we move into a new social circle. That's different. That's almost like a cultural survival thing that's how we are as people. To them, it's instantaneous. It's an invention. They put that mask on to to get what they want. You know, 1 minute they'll, you know, if they go into one town, they'll be a Christian minister if they think that's where all the money in that town is. In another town, they'll become like I don't know, pretend to be a lawyer if they can think, you know, that to take a class action lawsuit on behalf of people who've all been, you know, damaged in an industrial accident and saying, I'll get you all justice, while he lines his own pockets. In another town, they could be a Satanist. In another town, they lie and they lie and they lie and they lie and lie. It's just a persona switching thing. And then,
is there always a purpose behind the lies?
Yeah, to control and manipulate. It all comes down to power. They're only really interested in one thing, is power. Two things: power and control. They're not interested even in money, really, as per se. If there was no money in the world, they'd still be obsessed with this stuff. Like, that's when people say, "Oh, we had things like resource-based economies. There wouldn't be any psychopaths." Oh no, they would find a way in there. We'll never be rid of them. This is the thing. I mean, this is why I say, you know, don't be hoping for a utopia where you don't have them, and we're all like riding around on unicorns in a land of peace. It's better to protect yourself, get this knowledge out there, and to protect you and your family, especially when you're an adult and go to work at the workplace. Because that was really what got me going, Nathan, was when when I first started really reading this stuff and really finding it all out. I was like, how come we were not told this in school? They give us every other kind of health warnings about diseases and nutrition and everything else. Don't drink, don't smoke, blah, blah, blah. But the one thing that's everywhere, that's most dangerous and caused the most problems, we're not told about it. And that was kind of an anger. It would have saved me an awful lot of shit in my career and my younger years if I had known this, because I would have been able to avoid these bastards, you know. And so that was the reason.
You say they're everywhere. I mean, is there a percentage that you can give people, or how can you kind of quantify that so people understand what you mean when you say these people are everywhere? Because they are.
1% is probably realistic across all society. If you live in large urban areas where there's plenty of money and things like that, say a large city like London, that percentage will increase, not because people from there are psychopaths, but because the opportunities for them to prey. Think of it as a wolf looking for sheep. It's going to go for the farm most sheep are. So there'll be higher concentrations in large cities, and also clusters within jobs that you can make lots of money doing nothing. I imagine like real estate and things like that are full of them as well. And, you know, property and all that stuff. In Ireland, we had a property crash. You could literally count them as they were coming out, being pulled before courts and stuff. There was one guy in Ireland who had basically become this huge property developer on the backs of nothing, lied to people he had all this collateral. This is a great story. When the property system when the property thing here crashed, he vanished for like a year, and then he's seen walking along a road, staggering, with a big full growth of beard, long hair, claiming that he had been abducted by the IRA and they kept him as a prisoner for a year, and that he's a victim of, and they're going to kill him if he testifies in court. And immediately people are coming out and saying, we saw him going to restaurants and everything while he was supposed to be a fugitive, you know, on the run from the IRA. And it was just because he knew he'd done these horrible things, bankrupt families, put them out on the street, didn't care about that. His thing was to get pity for himself by pretending he had been abducted and held in a cellar for a year.
Oh, and it was common. My next question, which was about narcissistic supply, and you've got sort of positive and negative forms of this, but can you give us a brief explanation of what that actually is?
Well, all of us are narcissistic to some degree.
Sure.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you look at some sports people, say Conor McGregor or Muhammad Ali, Bruce Lee, it's only if they're hubris, if it goes wrong, that it looks bad. Otherwise, it's actually helped them get to the top of their game. There's nothing wrong with it in that context, you know. So, and there's only when you have no ability and you think you're wonderful, that's when it's a problem. But that's when. No. So people wanting, you see it on Facebook all the.
Oh, I think I've lost you again, Thomas. Maybe if you disconnect and reconnect again, I think your Wi-Fi has gone a bit poor. While Thomas Sheridan does that, I'll have a little bit of a talk about hopefully Thomas can hear me, about They Live. And They Live is a fantastic example of psychopaths that ties in nicely to something that Thomas Sheridan was just talking about. So hopefully if he disconnects and reconnects, we'll get him back in a moment. But in They Live, as you move through the film, you're put into different parts and different social economic structures that you're presented with. So you've got, at the beginning of the film, the sort of slums that are watching a TV around a campfire or what have you. And in that particular pocket of society, there's very, very few psychopaths. They're all just regular folk living reasonably peacefully and reasonably happily. But as you move up through the sort of more affluent areas, so in a supermarket you might see one or two psychopaths, but as you get up into the nice towering buildings, there's psychopaths everywhere. And when the guy gets into the bank, there's nothing but psychopaths, which is when he starts losing his control of himself and shooting up the place. But of course, in They Live, it's presented to us that in order to see a psychopath, which in that film it's presented as an alien, you have to put on a special set of glasses. And Thomas Sheridan is essentially explaining to people that there are no glasses needed, but it's not a simple subject. Are you back with us, Thomas?
Yeah, here I am. I can see you again. Yep.
I was just talking about They Live. Have you seen that movie?
It's okay. I mean, that scene with the glasses is great. But are you still there?
Yeah. I mean, I like to tie in that it's just sort of hiding the psychopaths as being mutants. And although it's a terrible movie, there's one little scene in there where there's a psychopath, or they present it as an alien or whatever. But he's talking to a regular guy about getting a job. And the guy essentially says, well, who cares? Don't worry about it. It'll come, don't worry. And the guy says, well, it's okay for you to say you're the one who got the promotion. In other words, the psychopath didn't give a shit that he'd fucked over his friend.
No, your man, what's his name in The Office? What's his name? The character he plays, that comedy act, that comedian. It's not very funny. I can't remember. Yeah, there's a scene in The Office where he says, I've got some bad news and good news. The bad news is, go. You're all being fired. The good news is I'm getting promotion.
Yes. Priceless. Oh, I think we've lost you again, Thomas. Yeah, I think, to boil it all down, again, if Thomas did disconnect and reconnect, he's obviously having a bit of trouble with his Wi-Fi. To boil it down into a nice little sentence, psychopaths don't give a shit. They couldn't care less. And in the case of Ricky Gervais in The Office, his lack of empathy for all the people losing their jobs is perfectly mirrored by his ability to see the bright side because he's the one getting the promotion, which is an absolutely ideal example of a psychopath. Although I'd never actually drawn that connection myself. But yeah, I've ordered a movie that Thomas Sheridan also recently plugged, which I've not watched, called The Nightcrawler, which hopefully we'll get to talk about a little bit more. Thomas is back now. While I've got you again, Thomas, can you tell us what an enabler is? I think you're on mute at the moment.
Default mute is annoying. Yeah, an enabler.
Yes.
An enabler. A classic enabler would be Moira Hindley to Ian Brady, the Moors murderers. He could have not done that stuff without her. Now, that doesn't make her innocent, but if you look at her history, she came from a ferociously dysfunctional family, probably raped by her own father, who was a vicious alcoholic. Ian Brady picked up on this, and he wanted to start killing children and to see what it was like. He was obsessed with Joseph Mengele, the Nazi doctor, and so he even had fluent German so he could feel like him. This is why it's just so disturbing that it actually go to those lengths. But she was a classic enabler. All the people around Jimmy Savile, they were all enablers. I would even go as far as the Margaret Thatcher and the rest of them. They were all enabling him. He would not. I mean, anyone who said that nobody knew what Jimmy Savile was up to are liars. As they're close to him, are liars, because he did not even hide it. He often made statements about it, and he was testing the waters all the time. But he knew he had shall we say, protection from the top. And there was a very interesting interview with Francis Rossi from Status Quo, the band, and he said that everyone knew what Savile was up to back in the 60s. And he said you dared not say anything because he surrounded himself with gangland figures and gangsters. So, you know, that they're enablers too. They're paid ones. But yeah, it depends. Like if you were a psychopath in the middle age, in say the late Middle Ages in Italy, your enablers would be the entire country, because you'd be able to pay them or terrify them. But most enablers are people who have been duped. I have a lot of sympathy for them, actually, in many cases. Now, that doesn't mean if they break the law they should get away with it. They shouldn't. But their enablers could be anything from their mother, who doesn't want to get rid. You remember? I don't know if you ever watched EastEnders years ago. Dot Cotton's son, Nick. Dot Cotton would have been the exact.
I don't now. I don't watch TV, but I remember Nick Cotton.
But I always thought it was a great character, that the mother couldn't see anything wrong with her son. He was the golden boy, and he was a monster. And that would be the classic enabler. They'll always go back to the mother when things go wrong for them. You know, when they've blown all their scams, they'll always go back to the parents or the mother.
I mean, that leads probably onto, I'm sure you've coined this term, but proto-psychopath?
Yeah, that's my one, because I wanted to. That's a very good segue. Yeah, proto-psychopath is important. You see, this is why we must be very careful when we go down this road. A proto-psychopath is someone who may demonstrate psychopathic pathology, behaviors, but is not actually a psychopath themselves. They have been damaged somehow. Now, if you look at something like the military, right? I saw a documentary recently about the U.S. Marines basic training, and they're basically turned into proto-psychopaths. Basically, that's what all the marching is about, all the incredible rigorous training, the trauma-based mind control, calling them names, abusing them. And also you see that in cults as well. Like a lot of the people who were around Jim Jones when he killed all those people in Jonestown would have been all protos as well. They're often been so far gaslighted, and so they've been so far gaslighted or damaged somehow. Suppose a child who was a victim of serious child abuse, that child is not going to grow up normal. No way. But that doesn't mean they're psychopaths. It's just that they're angry, they're lashing out at the world. There's a darkness there. And they can be cured. And if you put their brains underneath the fMRI scanner, they show the normal responses. But if they say, I'm hard me, I'm not bothered by the side of that, they're lying, because the brain scanner will show that they're actually being disturbed by it, but they're shutting it off. And that's why when soldiers come back from military service in combat zones and the post-traumatic stress kicks in and they end up, going bonkers, a lot of them, is because the proto-psychopath that they were made in the military is switched off slowly, and their full humanity comes back. And proto-psychopaths are people that can be cured. They can be fixed. A lot of people in gangs and stuff like that, grew up in poor neighborhoods. Hervey Cleckley, he wrote a book back in the 1940s called The Mask of Sanity. And he, in a pre-kind of scientific, neuroscience time, he had actually mentioned out that there was high levels of what looked like psychopathic behavior in poor neighborhoods, but he could not determine if these were the same kind of people. And even he, back in a pre-politically correct time, was figuring out that there is an environmental factor to proto-psychopathy, but there's not to full-blown psychopathy, because they can be born in homes where everything was just wonderful and dandy. The parents loved them. They had all the advantage in the world. That was the New York Times about 2011 or 12 had an article about this place in Florida where they got all these children that were suspected to be psychopaths into one place, which is kind of a spooky idea in itself anyway. And they discovered that most of these kids came from normal, healthy, loving parents. Then that brings us back to it's not genetic. It's not. And there was no proof of genetics in the genetic psychopathy in the family going back. They're almost like the interspecies predator thing again. They jumped into the skin suit. The most common message I get is, I watched my brother or my sister destroy people all their lives. I've even had parents write to me, tell me about this, and to my face, saying I had my son or daughter. Every person every decent man she was ever with, or decent guy, she destroyed him, used him up, took him for what he's worth, and destroyed him, and did terrible things, and manipulated him, love bombed them. But then she'd go, "Well, she's my daughter. What can I do?" And that's a tragedy of it. That's a tragedy of it.
I mean, you've kind of summed it up without me having to rephrase the question, which is if you're in a position where you've got a boss or, you know, somebody that you can potentially detach yourself from. I know in many of your videos, your advice is to do exactly that and never, ever go near them again. But in the case of family, it's a much more difficult situation. You can't do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it does happen. There are people that do disown their children and things like that after a while. But you have to feel really terrible for these people, because that can't be easy. That just cannot be easy at all. I have a friend in Norway who used to be a midwife, and she said that every so often, she delivered lots of babies, and she says every so often she would pick up a child that felt energetically wrong. It didn't feel right. I said, I can't explain it, but it didn't feel right. And she followed the life of these children, and often the mothers would not bond with them, and the mothers would be kind of thinking that they would be suffering from post-birth natal depression. And what was really they would describe things like that when it came feeding time. Now, later on, it was determined that these children were psychopaths because they had criminal histories, or it came out one way or another, that when it would come to things like breastfeeding, there was an element of attacking the breast. There was no mother-child bond. You know what I mean? It was like, give me that kind of thing. And this would greatly disturb these mothers, because especially if they had other children and the other children were not like that, there was no sense of bonding with the child. Often the child then grows up to make the parent feel like that they're the problem. They're the one who did it.
Sure. I mean, one of the things I wrote down.
It's a dark subject.
Sorry, go on. Say again, sorry.
No, I'm just saying. It's as much as we need to know this stuff to survive in the world. It's a bloody dark subject when you start thinking about it and those kinds of things. You know.
Definitely, it's a tricky. I have to take my hat off to what you do, because it is such a complicated and such a difficult subject. And one of the things I was going to hopefully get across to people watching is that we shouldn't be going on witch hunts. I know this is a point you make again and again, and it probably ties into a question I was going to again ask probably as my last question, but I'll ask it now. I've got a few more questions left. Which is it labeled is it dangerous to actually label people as psychopaths without having any medical qualifications or access to MFRI?
Yeah, it's like calling. Well, it depends on what they've done. I could do it with Tony Blair because he's murdered 1.5 million people. So that's that. There
Sure.
you go. I can't do it to the. I'm not going to. I mean, I never do it. That's like he's the only one, I think, unless they're serial killers that they've been diagnosed. I will never do about another human being. It's something I will not do, because it's. My attitude is that life is about wisdom. It's about growing and maturing as a society. You see, as crazy as this might sound, a lot of the goodness that we have in this world, in a social context, is in response to the monstrosities that they put upon us. I'll give you an example. In Ireland, we used to have a terrible problem with Catholic priests raping children. It was never talked about. It was covered up. And we would not have had this discussion with ourselves as a society, saying, did we judge the Catholic Church too much? If it wasn't for those psychopathic priests in there, because they actually forced us to wake up. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying it's almost like instead. I mean, I know there's a cause, so I shouldn't say a chicken and egg thing. It's complicated, but the attitude is if we go on witch hunts, it does two things. One, it dehumanizes us. We're better than that. We shouldn't be doing that. We're better than that, right? And it's just like calling people pedophiles, just like the feminists do, calling every man a rapist. It's dehumanizing. Everyone is entitled to their humanity.
Sure, but do you think there's a tendency for people to actually seek out and demonize psychopaths?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because they're actually projecting their own shadow. Now, when I say own shadow, I don't mean they're when the ones who go around hunting, like I have this thing that the people who generally, like you say, queer bashers, right? Someone who would actually go down to a gay pub and beat gay guys up. There's something wrong with them to go that far. It's one thing to be homophobic at a distance, but to actually go hands-on proactive, you're trying to touch them. You understand, kind of thing? Well, the psychopaths the same way too. Because our society is so dysfunctional, this is an important point as well, and there are so many dysfunctionalities built into this world as it stands, the psychopaths at the very top would be very happy for us to go on witch hunts down below so we don't point a finger at them. My attitude is, if we're going to go on a psychopathic witch hunt, we don't start at the bottom. We don't start at the grassroots. We go right to the very top. Right to the very top. And because
there's a reason, though, that the media manipulates this. And without me putting words in your mouth, how can I phrase it as a question? How does the media manipulate the idea of the reptilian brain to make us do exactly what you've just said?
They use the reptilian brain to say, oh, without it, we wouldn't have go-getters and we wouldn't have great characters in politics and science, and they're the ones who get out there and do it, and they're the one, they have like their reptilian brain is firing that norepinephrine, and they're hyper vigilant, and they're going out there to get them. But that's a lie, because no human society has ever been advanced by that. It's been advanced by discussion, sitting down, talking, interaction, exploring, respect. It doesn't work that way. I mean, it's only led to monstrosities when and they're very selective in it. They'll say something like, yeah, you need someone at the top of a corporation as a powerful reptilian complex, because they'll make the corporation strong, the economy strong, and create loads of jobs. Hold on a second. So that's okay, but Adolf Hitler isn't, or Joseph Stalin isn't, or Mao Zedong isn't, or Pol Pot isn't, or Margaret Thatcher, or Tony Blair isn't. And so they're very selective in how it's used. Very selective. They're okay in certain. And if you look at people like, who are very successful, they usually are not. It's not a result. I mean, genuinely successful that you would admire. It's based on talent. It's not based on how much of a bastard they were. We don't really admire people like that. We don't, and that's a difference. See, the psychopath confuses fear with respect. If they fear me, that's the same thing as if they respect me. They again, the wolf walking among the sheep.
Spot on. Just before we round up and get some of your email addresses, not email addresses, your website addresses, excuse me, can you tell us why people get the impression that a psychopath is a knife-wielding maniac?
Yeah, the movie Psycho, the Alfred Hitchcock movie Psycho did all that. The term psychopath did not mean even criminal in the olden days. It meant somebody who had like a weird and strange behavior about them that affected other people in a dark or an uncomfortable or unhealthy way. When that movie Psycho was made, everybody then started to think psychopaths were all like Norman Bates. Now, Norman Bates is not a psychopath. He's a delusional psychotic. That is a seriously unwell man. But if Norman Bates was a psychopath in that film, Psycho, he wouldn't have dressed up as his mother. He would have done something like poison the woman, steal her money, and then bury her in a bog somewhere with a car. He would have done it for money. He wouldn't have done it because he's trying to
carrying her around feeling emotion for the corpse.
Nope. He'd be glad the mother was gone, because then he could. Yeah, there would be no. He wouldn't have. He wouldn't have. The mother's dead. Who cares? That would be like. Yeah, now, exactly. So that did it, and everyone started saying, "Oh, psycho this, psycho that, psycho this," and it's unfortunate actually. That's where the term sociopath became popular, because they tried to say that it worked for a while that they're socially pathological rather than violent. But I said to myself, I decided when I was starting to put this stuff out there, I thought psychopath was a better term for a couple of reasons. One, it's the original. Two, it has an emotional effect on the people. And that was actually I was kind of vindicated in that when a book came out a couple of years ago called Confessions of a Sociopath. And it was all about how sociopaths are sexy. And it was a woman wrote it. And I'm not kidding you, Jen Nathan. You can look her up on the Dr. Phil. She's quoting me verbatim and saying things like, you know, stuff that I've actually said, and said, but I'm not a psychopath, I'm a sociopath, and sociopaths are sexy and cool and all this kind of thing. Oh yeah. And you know what her name was? Her pen name was M.E. Thomas, Me Thomas. And some people have said that she was taking the piss out of you. Yeah, and she got very rich off, and she got fucking rich off that too as well. She sold a movie deal and everything. But the sociopath thing became like watered down. You'd have people saying things like, I'm a sociopath, it's cool, I'll do anything. But no, I stuck with the term psychopath, because when you hear that, it's almost like hearing rapist. It's one of those, you know, you jump a little bit inside, and because it's a bad word for bad people. And
I will get you to give a bit more clarity to that, if that's all right, Thomas. I know I was just about to round up, but a lot of people on videos, I've done a poor job of trying to explain psychopaths, but they will say things like, well, a sociopath's not the same, or someone with borderline personality disorders, it's not the same.
Oh yeah.
Whereas for me, it's just a way of diluting it down. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely, completely agree. I mean, it's like, you know, it's like I said, are we going to, you know, watering psychopath down is like calling a rapist a selfish lover. You understand? It's like ridiculous. Yeah. It's like, let's not pussyfoot around here. You know, you could be in grave danger of having severe emotional, psychological damage if you happen to be in an office working with one, or a factory working with these bastards. Let's be very serious about it. Let's be very serious. Yeah, it's right. Borderline personality. I don't see a lot of that stuff comes from the American Psychiatric Association's DSM, the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual. And when you really get into that thing, it's all about selling treatments and drugs. So they're inventing. You know, they'd probably say that both of us here having this conversation have some kind of disorder.
We need medication for this. There's no doubt.
And so you need a bag of tablets. I need a bunch of injections, and you know, a course of treatments that will get some psychiatrist really rich. Get him a new yacht. Yeah, I know that, and that's where that comes from. That's where the watering down comes from, and the psychopaths love it. They love it because that's why I think a lot of female psychopaths get away. A lot of them get diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and then they're unwell women. In fact, there was one nurse in Italy who was murdering patients and taking their money, and they still didn't diagnose her as a psychopath. They diagnosed her as having borderline.
Unreal,
yep.
Bad. Thomas, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on. Can you tell us some of your website addresses before we close up?
Yeah, Thomas Sheridan Arts, that's it, .com. And my website, my YouTube channel is Thomas Sheridan Arts. And I have a weekly show which called The Velocity of Now, which is kind of like all the things I'm interested in. And it's a bit of fun and games and a bit of laugh as well. An important thing, before I go, an important thing in all this stuff is not to let it overwhelm you, not to let it poison you. That's not to let it darken you, to enjoy life, to enjoy yourself. Because, the world is poisoned by these monsters, but it's still, we can have a lot of fun and still enjoy our life. And still don't play into the darkness, because when you step into the darkness too much, they will jump in there as the savior to bring you out. And they won't save you, they'll destroy you.
Well, you have a nice little catchphrase that you say at the end of Velocity of Now. Can you roll us out with that? I love it. Fuck 'em if they can't take a joke.
Fuck 'em if they can't take a joke. That's a good way to live your life with anything. Yeah,
definitely.
And also to laugh at yourself too, because when you laugh at yourself, it's very good. It's very spiritually healthy and stuff like that. Yeah.
Once again, Thomas, thank you very much for being on Flat Earth UK.
Cheers, Nathan, and thanks again. All the best, mate.
Absolute pleasure. And for all of you who have joined us in chat, thank you very much for joining us live. I've been Nathan Oakley. I'll see you all in the next video.